It's time to play a game as old as the second caveman. Which fictional character would be another fictional character? The adult version of making Hulk Hogan and The Rock action figures fight against each other, then looking at their records and stats and saying one would win over the other.
Since Red Hook hates us and decided to give us only tiny tidbits of lore in single comic book pages for most of the characters, forgive us for any jumps of logic we may have. This will be a free-for-all between each of the heroes, from both 1 and 2, seeing which one would win.
Keep in mind, this is without subclasses and at max level, and any character in D2 will be measured, not exclusively D1 characters. Firstly, let's start with those who have little to no chance, the healers. Both Vestal and Plague Doctor cannot truly break from most of their damage being related to combo, or being overtime damage, making it so they could get a few licks in, but there's no real good argument for either of them being able to beat Hellion, along with others who suffer from wrong archetype, wrong place. One is Houndmaster and the other is Aquarium. They specialize in AoE damage and dodge, but outside of a bleed build, trying to get money, or fighting a Siren, they absolutely fumble when entering a 1v1, since most of their abilities only inflict decent debuffs and do mediocre damage.
Two more in the subcategory of being picked off the list are, funny enough, two of the most technologically advanced, both Musketeer and Arbalest. Despite technically having the best weapons in the group, they are cursed with being born in the medieval times. Current days, yes, a high caliber rifle would punch a hole through a Crusader, same with a high yield crossbow, which can be used for hunting moose if you're fucking stupid, meaning that both the crossbow and the musket are subpar and comparable to being hit by a melee weapon. Also, it should be noticed the unreliable accuracy and abysmal reload time, meaning as soon as you get a shot off, you're going to have to engage in combat with a musket or crossbow against a sword or mace, leaving you at a massive disadvantage.
Cowards and rats are good at sticking together and running away. The grave robber is a woman that ended up in a failed marriage and poisoned her husband. She never did learn to stop using backhanded tactics, so I'd just like you to think for one moment an 80-pound woman throwing a dagger at a 400-pound man in plate mail, and guess how the fight would go. Similarly, we have the Runaway, a pyromaniac that seems only good at burning her family, has very low damage, and only inflicts repeated stacks of burning, typically making the enemy sweat more than damaging them. Not to mention most characters have multiple weapons. Runaway has a firebomb and a fire poker that is heavily dented, that you could probably maybe block 1 or 2 hits with.
Shieldbreaker is a pretty decent character, a jack of all trades, can bypass stealth, can bypass guard, and can be his armor. The downside is that she only has one hand with a shield tied to the stump. If the shield is broken or if her snake is killed, a significant part of her kit is just gone, leaving her with just 2 abilities involving the spear. Alright, here be some people's favorite or least favorite healer slash magic caster in Darkest Dungeon, the Occultist. Boasting some of the strongest spells in the game, such as Burning Star, which can do a maximum damage between 12 and 18, not including the crit, which has a 15% chance to proc. He also has decent melee and range in most positions. The problem being most of his abilities in Darkest Dungeon 2 require setup. In a 4v4, typically his abilities work fine, but fighting one-on-one with no one take the blows for him, he'll get sent back to the Middle East in pieces before he can get off any major big spells.
Now, we passed your drunken dad who decided not to beat you, and it's time to join the grown-ups table. Everyone here actually has a decent chance to put up a fight and win this tournament. Gathering mold, gunk, and splinters, we scrape the bottom of the barrel of this list. Hellion and Bounty. Hold on. Nah, we ain't putting this man that low. He has the highest base damage. Alright, get the fuck out of here. You're higher up on the list. Man-at-Arms, get over here. Hellion seems to have gotten type 2 diabetes from the transition to the first to the second game, as most of her big ticket abilities now give her the winded status effect that nerf both her damage and speed, which 5 of her 7 abilities do, by the way. Outside of just generally attacking with the glaive, any other option puts her at disadvantage, but not as much disadvantage as her lack of armor. The only thing that is helping her out is that when she's at low health, she will deal 50% more damage, at least when she's below 25%.
Now, Man-at-Arms used to be that guy, but after a nerf his legs were taken out from under him. He's still a rather good character, but he's just not the same. He's very good at adding armor and riposte to himself and helping out his allies. When a 1v1, if you can get past the armor or remove the riposte, this old man is a damage sponge, but can still be whittled down due to his mediocre damage.
And as an honorable mention of the 6 that have a chance to hold the crown, the strongest character, Highwayman, sits at the feet of the stairs. He's a very dangerous character overall, having range but not slacking on his melee, even being able to bypass death's door slightly, and having devastating abilities such as point blank shot and double tap. Everything relies on him getting his tokens of all types. He can even steal tokens. The problem being that each of these characters above him though, except maybe 1 or 2, can reliably out-heal or stun him, not to mention in 2 cases out-damage him. He just doesn't have the survivability to sit at the peak.
Alright, now the part of the video that probably gets people pissed off.
If anyone's even made it this far.
But I consider the bottom 2 on this list to be Crusader and Bounty Hunter. Crusader's overall decent stats and does okay damage, but a good amount of his kit is crowd control and adding defense tokens to himself. He does have healing, but it's not good enough to matter in any way. I would say that he's an overall better jack of all trades character than those below him, but mostly because of his ability to give armor to himself. Bounty Hunter has one step above him sadly because Bounty Hunter counters him. Able to reliably bypass armor and has his own stun ability, he is enough to reliably beat Crusader, but not the rest above him except maybe Abomination.
Now, as another controversial take, DD1 and 2 are very different. So I'm putting Abomination at max level versus upgraded DD2 characters. So he's pretty much at 46 health, which is just shy of Leper and Flagellant in his human form. He doesn't have much, but he does have good stun. His blight ain't much to look at, so he mostly relies off his beast form for damage, boasting in fact some of the most damage of any character on the list, but the thing that kills him is that he doesn't have much in choice of attacks in his beast form. He only has 3 real attacks relying on debuffs otherwise, and attacks which reduce both his speed and damage. The thing that kills him is the lack of healing. Leper and Flagellant would most likely be able to withstand his damage and take him out. Jester, a fun hypothetical on him would be if he could land his combo token Finale, he could take half his health in a turn and weaken him. If he misses though, the fight is more or less over. Abomination would probably just rip him to pieces.
Now that we talked about him, let's bring up the Clown. Boasting really good bleed damage and be able to quickly rack up combo tokens, he's arguably in the top 2 damage dealers in both games, if not the number 1. There's 3 main flaws with this jokester. Having no real debuff besides debuff, he doesn't have a bad defense against afflictions, and he has a rather low health pool. And if you don't let him set up most of his abilities, he won't survive long enough to correct the issue. He has no ability to stun, so he can't stop you from doing anything specific. He has a dodge and blind, and that's it. But just to be frank, if everything goes perfectly and you don't have a way to counter him, he's probably going to do 58 damage to you or more. Now we have 2 titans standing at the end, on top of a mountain of bodies of everyone below them, Leper and Flagellant. Both can do extreme damage and heal almost anything you throw at them. There's not a real argument of anyone else beating these two. Now, theoretically, you might say Flagellant would win because of things like more and more and its large amount of blight buildup over time, but when you really break it down, it gets more interesting.
Now, shut up. I'm gonna do the math for you. Theoretically, in the first 2 turns, let's say Flagellant throws out 2 attacks, both having an average of 6 damage, and doing a blight proc of 4. So, meaning on average he can do 10 damage a turn with his main attack. Now, when you look over at Leper, unless he misses, he will do 12 damage on average. So at the end of the day, it only comes down to luck. So, you can get repeating hits without missing. Let's just see what happens with just the 2 of them hitting each other. In the first 2 rounds, Flagellant would deal 12 damage and 8 blight, versus Leper, which if he uses Revenge and attacks, again, not missing and getting his crit token, should be doing a whopping 60 damage, getting Flagellant to death's door immediately. The real problem comes down when both of them are on death's door, that being turn 3 or 4 depending on crits. Leper just blatantly out damages Flagellant, but Flagellant does 2 ticks of death's door per turn, on his turn and on Leper's turn, taking the ticks, leaving this hypothetically extremely biased interpretation. It's still left up to chance. Both of them will be on death's door, Flagellant reaching it first, but Leper quickly catching up, losing 2 a turn. So the chances are not even 100% victory. You know, in this hypothetical that I pulled out of my ass, Flagellant has a 30% chance of victory and Leper has a 70% chance. I'm sorry if any of you had to sit through this, but at the end of the day, Flagellant will most likely beat anybody in here, both canonically and non-canonically.